Vice, Fishbed, the MiG-21's lasting bite. They called it the Fishbed because from a distance, when it sliced the sky, its stubby delta wings and cigar body looked like a fish. Up close, it was more like a stubborn relic that refused to die. A one-seat, one-engine arrow that has outlived more polished, more pampered fighters. The MiG-21 is not elegant. It is not plush. It is a machine of compromise made lethal by cheapness, numbers, and an uncanny knack for survival. For half a century, it has been the backbone of air forces from India to Angola, the steady, snarling face of Cold War air power, and the last thing many pilots saw before they became legends. The cheap little killer that conquered the world. When you read the spec sheet, Supersonic, Mach 2-ish armed with short-range missiles and cannon, you might dismiss the Fishbed as a mid-century toy. That would be a mistake. The genius of the MiG-21 was its simplicity. Small radar, light airframe, minimal electronics. Throw in a robust engine and a pilot trained to press the advantage, and you had an aircraft perfectly suited to the high-tempo, low-cost wars of the post-colonial world. The Soviet Union exported thousands of these jets. They arrived in crates, went together fast, and could be maintained by crews with little more than a toolbox and a stubborn optimism. For nations on a budget, newly independent, desperate for prestige, or simply fighting a battle on a shoestring, the Fishbed was salvation. Close quarters and short runs. The MiG-21 was built for quick, close engagements. Its fuel tanks were small, its avionics basic, and its cockpit had the cramped charm of a telephone booth. That meant short missions and intense pilot workload, hairpin turns, eyeballs out G maneuvers, and a constant drumbeat of throat-tightening decisions. It excelled in dogfights where the pilot and aircraft could punch and grind at close range. Outside of that, the Fishbed had limits. It couldn't loaf on station for long, couldn't carry massive payloads, and its older radars made beyond visual range combat a joke in the face of modern fighters. But in the right hands and the right environment, it was terrifyingly effective. Pilots and culture, living with the beast, talk to a MiG-21 pilot, the ones who came back to tell the story, and you get a portrait of a particular breed. Improvised, borderline masochistic, proud in ways outsiders often mistake for bravado. They remember the smell of burned oil at dawn, the thin mattress of padding in the ejection seat, the way the nose sat high on takeoff like a predator lifting off. They recount missions like confessions, each one a mix of meticulous training and improvisation under fire. The cockpit's controls could bite if you weren't respectful. One wrong input and you were at the mercy of aerodynamics and physics. But that friction produced pilots who trusted their instincts. The MiG-21 did not coddle. It demanded competence. The great wars where a simple plane mattered. The Fishbed story is stitched through 1,000 conflicts. It saw major action in the Arab-Israeli wars, played a starring role in the skies over India and Pakistan, and showed up in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, wherever a Soviet bloc ally needed a fighter overnight. It didn't win every fight, no machine does, but it changed the calculus simply by being there in numbers. In some wars it was an equalizer. In others, a blunt instrument exposed by new technologies. Its legacy is messy, a mix of tactical brilliance, tragic losses, heroic sorties, and embarrassing shootdowns. And yet it endured, because when politics and logistics matter more than luxury or cutting-edge performance, the Fishbed fit the bill. Upgrades, patchwork, and national flavors. One of the MiG-21's strangest qualities is how adaptable it became. Countries took the base model and made it their own. New avionics here, upgraded radar there, updated engines, or additional pylons for modern missiles. India's upgraded Fishbeds, for example, were aircraft patched into modern doctrines. Better radios, improved HUDs, and locally made spares that kept them operational, long after the original designers had stopped thinking about them. Other countries jury-rigged duct tape and inventiveness, literally, to keep their fleets flying. That DIY ethic turned the Fishbed into an emblem of national resilience. Not the sleek badge of industrial might, but the stubborn tool of a country that could not afford to wait for perfection. The human cost, pilots, ground crews, and families. For all its utilitarian charm, the MiG-21 is also a grim ledger of human loss. Its accident rate, especially in poorly maintained fleets or undertrained squadrons, has been notoriously high. Mechanical failures and aging airframes meant that many pilots didn't die in battle, but were felled by parts that failed, or systems that gave out at the worst possible time. Ground crews often worked in difficult conditions, improvising solutions to keep jets flight ready. Behind every sortie were families who understood that a flight in a fishbed could be a last flight. The machine's mythology has a dark side, the steady attrition of lives that kept the jets in the air. Iconic encounters, moments that shaped myth. There are moments that stick. A fishbed climbing hard out of an airbase as dawn light strips the paint into a silhouette. A short-range missile lock and a dogfight that plays out in blind harmony between two pilots. The hush of a base after the last jet rolls in. And there are more famous, cinematic episodes, shoot-downs that become political fireworks daring intercepts, and the occasional story of a pilot who brought his bird home with damage that would have grounded anything else. These encounters made the MiG-21 more than a tool. They turned it into a character, flawed, dangerous, and absolutely breathtaking when it screamed past. Why the fishbed stayed longer than it should have. Technology moved on. Stealth, networked sensors, and advanced missiles rewrote the rulebook. Yet the MiG-21 kept flying. Why? Because for many air forces the alternatives were painfully expensive or politically complicated. New jets meant complex logistics and supply chains that some countries could not sustain. The fishbed, being cheap and well understood, fit into a strategic logic that prioritized presence over perfection. If an air force could keep a dozen fishbeds operational where they previously had none, that was a win. The plane became a function of geopolitics and budgets as much as aerodynamics. The nostalgia factor, a love that's also critique. There is nostalgia around the fishbed that borders on cultish. Old pilots gather, swap stories, and polish wrecks into museum pieces. Children in certain countries still draw delta wings in their notebooks. A little salute to an era where air power was raw and tactile. But nostalgia must be balanced with critique. The MiG-21's persistence was often a symptom of neglect, of failing to invest in modernization, of accepting higher accident risks, of a tolerance for attrition that would be unacceptable elsewhere. Loving the fishbed's history does not mean ignoring the price paid to keep it flying. The last stand, retirement, museums, and aviator lore. Across the world, the MiG-21 is finally being retired. Some countries have replaced it with more advanced fighters. Others have retired entire squadrons with a mixture of relief and sorrow. The skies no longer echo as often with the fishbed's distinct whine, but its presence lingers in museums and memorials, and in the collective memory of militaries. And in scrapyards around the globe, parts of fishbeds lie half buried in sand. The last testament to an aircraft that outlived its intended lifespan by sheer will and widespread use. The fishbed's legacy, practical and poetic. The MiG-21's legacy is dual. Practical in the sense that it changed how nations thought about affordable air power. Poetic in the way it etched itself into the imagination of pilots and nations. It proved that a jet doesn't have to be the best to be lethal or consequential. Numbers, doctrine, training, and political will can make even a modest aircraft a potent force. It taught hard lessons about maintenance, procurement, and the limits of export architecture. But beyond doctrine and logistics, the fishbed remains a symbol of a particular moment in history when speed, economy, and audacity reigned. Last words, a plane that refused to be elegant. The MiG-21 will never be graceful in the way a modern stealth fighter is. It was never meant to be. It was meant to be built quickly, exported widely, and fought hard. In that, it succeeded, sometimes magnificently, sometimes tragically. The fishbed's real power was less in its hardware and more in what it enabled. The projection of power for countries who could not afford perfection, a classroom where generations of pilots learned the unforgiving lessons of air combat, and a stubborn little jet that, against all odds, refused to be forgotten. When the last of them finally rolls into a museum or a scrapyard, there will be pilots who salute and mechanics who quietly pocket a rivet as a keepsake. They will tell stories of close calls, of near miraculous landings, of comrades lost and missions won. Those stories are the MiG-21's true inventory, less about parts and flight hours than about people who lived and died with the fishbed's hum in their ears. For better or worse, that's the plane's legacy, a simple, biting reminder that sometimes utility outlives elegance and grit outlives glamour.